Welcome to the Sober Living Stories podcast. This podcast is dedicated to sharing stories of sobriety. We shine a spotlight on individuals who have faced the challenges of alcoholism and addiction and are today living out their best lives sober. Each guest has experienced incredible transformation and are here to share their story with you. I'm Jessica Stefanovic, your host. Join me each week as guests from all walks of life share their stories to inspire and provide hope to those who need it most. Today, we are joined with Stefanie, who was born in Sacramento, California. Her sobriety journey was marked by significant health challenges. She got sober in 2019 and was diagnosed with cervical cancer shortly thereafter, January of 2020. In addition to that, she was then diagnosed with brain cancer in 2021 and managed to stay sober and stay on the course of good health through it all. Welcome, Stefanie, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Jessica. It's great to be here. I don't know if alcoholics are born or if they're made, but I definitely, my earliest memories, there was this underlying feeling of just not belonging. Like I felt like I was the only one who felt like I felt. I felt like everybody else looked so happy, just feeling that restless, irritable discontentedness. Back to my earliest memories, I remember being in a car seat. I was really upset about something, but like underneath it, I had that feeling of like, if I had my way, then I just wouldn't exist. Like I would have never been born. But I don't feel that way now. And it was not until I got into recovery that I started to recognize, it sounds so strange to say it, but it was almost like that was my ego telling me that I was different. When I first was just considering getting sober, somebody told me, "You're not special," and I was like, "How dare you say that?" And at first, it was really like hurt me, really, because I thought I was special, and they were like, "Well, you're special, just like everybody else is special, though." That at first was like a slap in the face, but just maybe like 30 minutes later, honestly, it wasn't even that long. I was just like, oh, I'm not special. And I got to just let go of feeling like I had to be the best at everything, because what I really felt underneath that was that I was the worst at everything, that I had something to prove, basically, what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now, I guess, is the idea of telling the story. I grew up around alcohol. My grandfather drank. He had like a full bar and he had the drinking room. It wasn't the family room, it was the drinking room. And I don't ever remember him behaving as if he was drunk, but I'm sure that he was. I guess it was just that was what was normal to me. I grew up in a family where I was pretty neglected. I, would go to school with the same clothes on for a few days in a row. There wasn't a whole lot of food in the house. My oldest sister was actually my two older sisters, like they took on probably more of a role than they should have. They were those parentified siblings. They cared about me, but they also kind of resented me, as a lot of parentified siblings do, resent their younger siblings, or just whatever siblings they're made to take care of. I remember spinning around in the living room for hours And I was telling my friend about that, and she was like, that was just you trying to get a head change. Like, that was way before I ever had a drink. That was way before I ever. So I also am in recovery for food addiction. So I would spin around in my living room. When I was about 8 years old, I had my first binge eating experience, and I remember it pretty well. It was a way for me to feel in control, and I was 8, and so I didn't have necessarily access to alcohol at that time. And so what I did have access to was food. And I also knew that I wouldn't get, well, I wouldn't get in trouble for eating, but I did end up getting in trouble for the amount of food that I ate. Lots of different addictions. Like if one is good, two is better, and 1,000 is never enough. We can't ever get enough of what we don't actually want. And so it's not the food, it's not the alcohol, it's not the drugs, it's not, those are all symptoms, those are all solutions to the problem, which is that restless, irritable, and discontentedness that I have felt pretty much for my whole life until I got into recovery. So I knew that I had addiction problems since I was 8. And I thought that it was a matter of willpower. I thought, if I just wanted it enough, then I would change my behavior. That never even moved the needle a little tiny bit. I heard recently, you can never shame yourself into being a version of yourself that you can love. That really struck me as like absolutely true. So, back whenever I was in high school, I would put like an outfit that was too small for me up on my closet door so that it would give me some motivation, and it never worked. Like, maybe it would work for somebody who wasn't an addict, but it definitely didn't work for me. That was me shaming myself, changing my behavior, but I never did change my behavior. I have always been rebellious, defiant, and I've always wanted to do things my way. I've always wanted to prove that other people were wrong, just regardless. It doesn't matter what it is, and I remember the first time that somebody said being right is never as good as being happy. And I have written in my big book, like, right and happy, and like the like being happy is greater. It's always greater than being right. And
that's a big lesson. That's a big lesson to learn, and a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. There was always this feeling of depression. There was always this feeling of not being good enough, not being thin enough, not being smart. Well, I always knew that I was smart, which now I'm not as smart because I've had a brain tumor removed, but it doesn't matter. Like, I'm as smart as I need to be. When I was in grade school, there was this this DARE program, Dare to Keep Kids Off of Drugs. And I remember being like, I can't wait till somebody offers me drugs because I'm going to do them.
Really? You had that memory of that?
Well, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, like,
defiance and like ready to go.
Yeah.
Do you remember the first time someone offered you that and you actually took them up on it? And
oh yeah. Yeah. I was 10, and I was at a sleepover. We all like drank wine, white wine, really bad. But and we drank it to get drunk, and it was the first time that I remember being able to just kind of let my shoulders drop and just like, this is nice. I like this. I felt a part of rather than apart from for the first time in my life. And I didn't get in trouble for it. Throughout middle school, I continued to drink, but I started smoking pot when I was I think I was 13. I mean, maybe it was eighth grade, I think. And I just, it's anytime that I would do a new substance, I would be like, this is the best thing ever. And whenever I whenever I tried opiates for the first time, I think I was 14, and I was like, you can never have somebody that you just call for this because you will ruin your life. You will absolutely ruin your life. Like, I liked it so much that I I foresaw that I would ruin my life from
So,
doing it.
what's really interesting listening to you is that it seems that from a very early age, you had the understanding that from spinning around in that room to binging on food at 8 to at 10, being offered alcohol and taking it as sleepover. Like, when was your first thought that this is not making my life work, and you wanted to change it?
When I turned 21, I went to the bar, and I went to the Flame Club. That was my local bar. I lived 2 blocks away from there, and I would have to just like duck out at the end of the night so that people wouldn't come home with me. But I remember this woman in her 30s being at the bar and seeing her and being like, I'm never going to be that person. I'm never going to be the bar fly who's well into her 30s. Sounds so strange to say it now because I'm 39.
Right.
But I was like, I get to do this because I'm 21, 22, 23, 24. About 24 was when I was like, this isn't fun anymore. I'm not enjoying this anymore.
Right. Okay.
By that time, I was doing coke more nights than I wasn't, and I had smoked meth a few times. It stopped being fun, and it never occurred to me to seek treatment of any kind. I just felt like I needed to move away from Sacramento. So when I was 26, I moved from Sacramento down to San Diego, about 500 miles away. And I would say that was probably the most miserable that I have been. I think whenever I went on disability was when I started. I was still living in Sacramento, but definitely it sounds so simple to be like, oh, I'm gonna be on disability. I'm gonna be able to do whatever I want all the time. It was not what I was expecting. Everything ramped up. The binge eating, the drinking, the smoking pot, the coke, all of it just intensified. And like I said, by that time I was about 25, and I decided to move away to San Diego, and so I moved away from all those things. As I look back on it now, I think that was what I blamed for my troubles was all the cocaine. That it was never my drug of choice. Opiates, that was my drug of choice, and pot. Those were my drugs of choice, and food.
You do such a good job with not only going back to you're spinning in the room when you're young, Then you're 8 years old, where there's an introduction of food. Then there's 10 years old, introduction of alcohol. And that is so commonplace for across the board for so many people that if it's not one, then it's the other. And if you're, and you explained it perfectly, you said something about, you're constantly picking up something that you don't want to make you feel a certain way. And it's just so true. If it's not one thing, it's another. And yeah, you really explained that perfectly.
Being in San Diego, I was there for 2 years, and that was definitely the most depressed. I'll say that degree, and I think that was when I started trying to improve my just physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally. That I think, so when I moved to San Diego, that was my first attempt to get better. That was the first time that I recognized that just something wasn't right. That was a really good way to put it. Like it wasn't that I necessarily was like, oh, I need to stop drinking, but it was like something needs to change. Something
needs to change. Yes. So it's the beginning of the climb. It's the beginning of the corner, the turning of the corner, even though we're at the bottom of the hill.
right.
And it's just a pivotal. I think it's a pivotal moment, regardless of how it looks like for anybody, because it's the start of something, something good.
Yeah. It went from, I get to do this, I'm entitled to do this, to I don't want to do this.
Right.
I don't do this
I don't
anymore.
do this anymore.
But I don't know how to stop. So
There you go.
I mean, I tried everything that I could think of in my own addict alcoholic mind, anything that I could come up with to improve my situation. A few things made a bit of a difference. Like going to therapy, I think definitely helped maybe 10%, 10% as much as recovery. I read a lot of good books, and they all had their individual things to contribute. But, there's this idea of being in the stands and talking about it rather than being on the court and living it.
Yes.
And I think that like for me, recovery was me actually being on the court and living it rather than being in the stands talking about it, talking about the game rather than playing the game. I always thought that I knew what I needed. It sounds so strange to say those words today because I didn't know what I needed. And to even think that I could have just sounds so absurd to me today, because what I really needed was to work a recovery program. So after all these attempts and all these self-will, ego, self-guided attempts that I made to feel better, there were a lot of them. The geographicals, the moving to San Diego, and then moving from San Diego up to Chico, and then moving from Chico to Nevada City, and then moving from Nevada City back to Sacramento. I mean, I moved all over California, and it was one of those, wherever you go, there you are. Like, you take your problems with you. I don't know. I never lived anywhere for more than 2 years, and that was only a couple places that I lived for 2 years. Everywhere else was like 6 months, a year. I mean, during my entire adult life. So I definitely, whenever it talks about the geographical cures in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, I was like, yep, that was me.
Me too. Yes,
and I didn't even realize it at the time. I just thought, oh, if I move here, then I'll be happy. If I go here or if I read this book, or if I get this boyfriend, or if I break up with this boyfriend, or if I go to this therapy, or if I read this book, then I'll be happy. And it never made even one little bit of difference. I got into recovery, and it was the second time in my life where I was able to drop my shoulders and just be like, oh, this is where it's supposed to be this whole time.
Oh,
You
wow.
know, so my experience, I never knew anything about AA or recovery or any of it. I had never, I'd never been around anybody who had been in recovery. Um, so I got to recovery through good old fashioned 12 stepping. Somebody was basically like, I was saying, well, I have addictions just like everybody has addictions. And and the person was like, well, have you ever thought of getting help for it? And I was like, well, uh obviously I've gotten help for it. I've gone to therapy and I've, done all these things, and they were like, well, what about working a recovery program? People in recovery can go anywhere that alcohol is being served as long as they're in fit spiritual condition, as opposed to, am I trying to get some vicarious fun from the people around me rather than like actually going there to be of help in some way. So I came into the program. 3 weeks later, I went to my friend's wedding. So at the bachelorette weekend, I was drinking. Then I got sober. And then 3 weeks later, I was at her wedding. And I talked to my sponsor and I was like, what am I going to do? All these people, we spent the weekend together and I was drinking then. And now I'm not. And I just don't know what to do. And she was like, well, have a drink in your hand, and if somebody says, do you want a drink, just say no, and if they continue to pressure you, then you can leave. And it was like, I was like, genius. I would have never come, I mean, I was brand new sober. I couldn't even
Yes.
put together enough thoughts to go that far. And I went to that wedding and nobody pressured me to drink. That was just a
Right.
story that I made up in my head. It was what I expected them to do, and it wasn't the truth. And I think I learned that I have a choice. Like I went through my life um just really like trying to live up to other people's expectations, trying to make them happy, trying to behave the way that they expected me to behave. I lied a lot. And I thought that I was honest, but I lied a lot, and I lied by omission. I would not, I would cover up my mistakes that I made just so that people wouldn't find out. And I was very secretive with my drinking and with my drug use, and the food was the most shameful of any of those things, because I couldn't share that with even my closest drinking and drug buddies. Yeah, I learned that I had a choice, and that I had a voice. If what you're saying is the truth, like, it's not a matter of how you say it. If it's the truth, then and I believe that honesty doesn't ever have to be brutal, but if it's honest, if it's the truth, so I was able to go to this wedding, and nobody pressured me to drink. A shot of tequila did get spilled, right, like they were handing it across me, and it spilled like right as it was going across me, and it was difficult, but it wasn't as difficult as I had expected it to be, because I had had this conversation with my sponsor. I had that accountability plan with my sponsor, and I was so brand new in sobriety that I was desperate. Whenever I came into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, I was desperate and I was dying. I was not healthy. I needed help. That was it.
Yeah.
I had prayed for help a few times before. I came into recovery believing in a higher power, but not necessarily having faith in a higher power. So I got sober in October of 2019, and in January of 2020, so just about 4 months later, was when I was diagnosed with the cervical cancer. When I met my first sponsor, she said, get to the meetings 10 to 15 minutes early and introduce yourself to everybody in the room. And I was like, you
Wow.
have to be kidding me. And I'm glad that she did, because by the time I got that diagnosis of the cervical cancer, everybody in my home group, which my home group was like all the different time slots at a clubhouse. So it was basically like the whole clubhouse, all, 11:30, the 5, the 6, the 7:30, the 9:30, they were all group 3. And so everybody there knew my name. And I was glad that they did, because they were there for me. They supported me through that, through my hysterectomy. And I remember when I remember not trusting it at first. I remember coming into the rooms and being like, these people don't know anything about me. Like, why are they so happy that I just keep showing up? Like, they don't even know, they don't know how smart I am, or how funny I am, or what a good driver I am, or how good at math I am. Like, they don't know any of those things. Like, why are they so happy to see me? And I have a different understanding of that now. That's what we do. As like
Yes.
it
And
are here for the newcomer.
right, right. And, and it's regardless of where, how, when, what, if you have that commonality where you're sharing an addiction or an alcoholism problem and you're there to get well, you will do anything to help somebody do that.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. I love that advice, by showing up early, by introducing yourself. I mean, those are bold moves in early sobriety, but
Mm-hmm.
look at the community, the instant community that was built around you so
Mm-hmm.
quickly. And then when you had some tough stuff come down, for early sobriety to have a diagnosis of cancer is,
Mm-hmm.
I would imagine, really difficult and surprising, and not what you had expected, but you had that built-in support system. So how did that, and then you had another diagnosis. Could you talk a little bit about that and the support system that helped you through that as well?
Yeah, yeah. So I had the hysterectomy, and then I ended up having to have radiation for the cervical cancer as well. The initial diagnosis, it was scary. It was unexpected. It was surprising. It was all those things, but it was also terrifying. I you know I when I found out I was going to have radiation, I talked to my sponsor again, and I was like, I'm scared. I feel like if I just had, faith that God was going to take care of me, then I wouldn't be scared. And my sponsor was like, "Of course you're scared, Stefanie. Like, if you weren't scared, then I would be afraid, because that's what we did when we were out there drinking, was that we just wouldn't feel our feelings. So like, it's okay to be afraid and do it anyway." I had the radiation, and I got done in June, and then the following April, I just had a seizure one day. I had no symptoms. I had no blurred vision, nothing. I had no headaches. Uh, I just had a seizure one day, and I went to I went to the emergency room, and the ER doctor said, "You appear to have a brain tumor, and we'll find out in the morning whether or not it's operable." And I remember in that moment just being like, "Okay, what do I have to do?" Like, I didn't feel scared. I didn't feel, so that's just a testament to maybe 15 months. No, I guess it was more like 18 months into the program. I was changed. I had
Change.
developed that faith in God, that God would take care of me. It was just like, okay, what do I need to do?
Able to handle life so much better in such a short amount of time.
Yeah. And it very much is just like accepting life on life's terms. It was definitely, um, after I had the seizure, I wasn't able to drive for 6 months. I was able to see the value in having a more simple life. It was just like, okay, well, I'm going to work with what I have, and I'm going to ride my bike more, and I'm going to walk on the beach more, and I'm going to, these are all the things that I get to do now that I can't drive. In July was when I got the diagnosis. I had the seizure in April, but they were treating me for blood clots, and they thought I had a stroke because what turned out to be the tumor. When they did the scan, they thought it was blood. So when they did the scan 3 months later, it hadn't gotten any smaller. That was what made them decide, okay, it's a tumor.
Okay.
So they stopped treating me for the blood clots and the stroke, because I never had a stroke. And they started, 2 weeks later was when I had the brain surgery. And, my dad came out and took care of me. I was able to stay sober, and it was almost like it didn't ever even occur to me to drink or use drugs or use food. It was like it was never even an option for me. I guess because I knew on some level that even if I was to drink or use food, that the problem would just be waiting there for me. So whenever I was diagnosed with the cervical cancer, like I had a choice. I had a choice to either get busy living or get busy dying, and I chose life. I choose life every day. But there are a lot of people who don't, and that's fine for them. But for me, I chose life, and I still choose life every day. So, when I tell my story now, sometimes I include the brain cancer and the cervical cancer, and sometimes I don't. But what I can say is that it definitely helped me to develop that faith that no matter what happens, God's got me, and whatever I can come up with in my own mind as what's best for me is just not even in the same like hemisphere as what God has planned for me. I that restless, irritable, and discontent feeling that I felt from my earliest memories, since I've been in recovery, I don't feel that anymore. From the outside looking in, there are definitely signs that my life is better today than it was before. But that internal experience that I have, like I always felt hollow and empty inside. And I was always trying to fill up that emptiness with food and drugs and booze and and relationships, and today that's just not there anymore. I feel fulfilled. I do get something from helping other people. I get to stay sober from helping other people. Being of service to other people is like, it instantly gets me out of my own head when I start feeling that self-pity, and when I start feeling that selfishness. I do my nightly inventory most nights, not every night, but most nights. And the days whenever I'm thinking about other people more, there's only so much space that can be taken up by our brains. The more I'm thinking about other people, the less I'm thinking about myself.
There's a lot of people who will be listening to this and to your story who aren't where you are. They don't have 4 years. Maybe they have 4 days. What would you say to that person?
Okay. Keep coming back. It gets better. We really do care. Like that's something that when I first came in, I saw it in other people, that they really truly cared about me. Like I said, and just because I existed, like I didn't have to prove anything to these people. That truly selfless spirit that I see in myself, and that I see in many of our recovery members, because I am a member of Overeaters Anonymous as well. For me, just being around people that I really felt cared about me was a good beginning. I did definitely work the steps as quickly as I was able to. How long do you want to be sick? How long do you want to stay sick? It's confronting. For me, like living sober and getting sober, they say it's much easier to stay sober than it is to get sober. I wouldn't know. All the times that I've sworn to never drink again, and I did drink again. I wasn't working a recovery program. Since I've come to a 12-step program, I have not gone out yet. Today, I don't have to. Doing the next right thing, maybe that's a good way to put it too, is like, as long as I do the next right thing, the next right one thing at a time, just one thing at a time, there's a pretty good chance of me being able to get through today sober.
It's incredible. It's a complete transformation. And I'm so grateful that you shared also, like you went over quite a few times on how addiction is like hand in hand with other addictions. And so I don't think it's surprising when somebody who's alcoholic will share about overeating, or somebody who's alcoholic will share about drug abuse, or it's just hand in hand. And even people who are listening who are not true alcoholics or drug addicts can relate to excessive anything to make you feel a certain way, and how it doesn't ever really serve you, until you make that shift and like, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to do this. And you start living different. So you really, really exemplified that. Amazing. And I think it's going to hit a lot of people in a lot of different ways. I appreciate you coming on here and just having the courage to share your story out loud.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for tuning into the Sober Living Stories podcast. If you have been inspired, consider subscribing and sharing with anyone who could use hope in their lives. Remember to stay tuned for more inspiring stories in the episodes to come. To view our featured author of the month, or to become a guest yourself, visit www.jessicastepanovic.com.